It started with a flag in the dirt, just a little orange marker poking out of my lawn like it was claiming new territory in some suburban land grab. At first, I thought it was utility work, maybe gas lines, fiber upgrades, the usual parade of fluorescent vests and half-finished promises. But then I saw the others. A straight line of flags snaked across the edge of my yard, down past the willow tree my grandfather planted in '57, curved around my dock like a crime scene outline, and ended right at the edge of the pond. My grandfather's pond. A man I didn't recognize, clipboard, khaki hat, the whole HOA cosplay uniform, was squatting near my fence line, drawing something on a tablet. He didn't even look up when I walked over. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep it neighborly. He gave me the kind of glance you reserve for telemarketers and people who say ATM machine. "Just marking off the proposed easement," he said, tapping at the screen. "Easement?" I echoed. He finally stood, squinting at me like I'd interrupted the Gettysburg Address. "You're the guy with the exempt parcel, right? The one that's technically not in the HOA but still connected to it?" "Yeah, so good news. The board voted to reclaim the shared green space. Gonna make a walking trail, maybe put in a dog station. You'll be compensated, of course." I blinked. "You're talking about my grandfather's land." "Well," he shrugged like that was a minor technicality. "Technically, it's community adjacent now. Not much you can do." He pointed at the water behind me like it was a pothole, not a spring-fed pond that had been in my family since Eisenhower. And that, unfortunately, falls within the revised zone. I didn't say anything, not at first. I just looked past him at the flag stabbing my lawn, the willow rustling beside the old dock, and the little green bench where I used to sit with my grandfather every Sunday after church while he smoked his pipe and told me the story of how he built this place with his bare hands and a stubborn refusal to ask for help. The clipboard guy cleared his throat. "Anyway, just wanted to give you a heads up. Should be finalized in about 2 weeks. You'll get a letter." He turned and walked off like we'd just wrapped up a meeting about fence paint. And that was the moment I realized the HOA wasn't just overstepping. They were about to walk all over my grandfather's legacy with a doggy bag dispenser and a jogging path. And I don't jog. Let me back up. My name's Elijah Cole. I'm 38 years old, semi-retired, and up until about a month ago, I thought moving into my grandfather's old place would be the start of something peaceful. The house sits on the edge of a sleepy cul-de-sac outside Raleigh. 3 bedrooms, wraparound porch, a pond, and a stretch of land that never made it onto the HOA grid back when the development mushroomed around it in the 90s. My grandfather made sure of that. He kept the property lines clean, the paperwork cleaner, and he paid the county directly, bypassing every HOA offer that came his way, like they were trying to sell him expired milk. He was a World War II vet, quiet as a Sunday morning and just as predictable. Planted that willow himself when he got back from Europe. Dug the pond with a rented backhoe and a bad knee. He always said the water helped him think. When I was a kid, we used to sit on that dock and throw rocks. One for every law, he said, was written by people who ain't lived long enough to own land. When he passed, the house sat empty for almost 5 years. No one in the family wanted to deal with it. Too old, too remote, too much work. I was living in DC at the time, buried in briefs and burnout, fresh off a decade spent reading more statutes than sleep. Then one day I got a manila envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a key, a note in my grandfather's handwriting, shaky but still stubborn, and a faded photo of the 2 of us by the pond. On the back he'd written, "If you ever get tired of the noise, come home. Just don't let anyone mess with the bench." That was all it took. I packed up, moved south, and started writing legal commentary part-time while fishing in the mornings and restoring the dock on weekends. The willow's still standing. The bench is still there. I even kept the old mailbox with his name on it, paint peeling and all. It's not fancy, it's not landscaped, and it's definitely not aesthetic forward, as one HOA bulletin passive-aggressively put it. But it's mine, and I'll be damned if some clipboard-happy HOA board is going to steal it with zoning jargon and trail mix diplomacy. They don't know what kind of man they're dealing with. I didn't just inherit land, I inherited a war, and I know how to fight it, politely, professionally, and with a paper trail longer than their entire charter. The letter came folded in thirds, printed on paper so stiff it could probably slice drywall. No envelope, just wedged between my front door and the frame like a passive-aggressive fortune cookie. The header read, "Notice of violation, unauthorized water feature maintenance." I blinked. That was a new one. According to the HOA, I was in breach of community landscaping guidelines for conducting unapproved activity on shared green space. Translation, they saw me skimming algae off my own damn pond and decided it was time to regulate photosynthesis. At first, I laughed. Out loud, alone in the kitchen. like a man who's read too many zoning ordinances and finally snapped. I mean, it wasn't even a good attempt. The HOA didn't own my property. That was the whole point. I'd confirmed it during escrow, confirmed it again when I inherited, and just to be sure, confirmed it a third time with the county recorder's office when I moved in. I even had a folder labeled "In Case of Idiots" that held the original deed from 1956, a boundary map drawn in glorious black ink, and 2 letters from the county acknowledging that the parcel had never, and would never, be subject to HOA governance. But of course, facts don't matter when someone with a title and a clipboard wants to mark their territory. I set the letter down and walked out to the dock, the same dock my grandfather built when Eisenhower was in office. I sat on the bench, stared at the water, and wondered what kind of neighborhood needed a permission slip for cleaning a pond. That's when I saw her. Sharon Tiller, HOA president. 40-something going on full autocracy. The kind of woman who wore heels to inspect mailboxes and had her hair pulled so tight it could intercept Wi-Fi signals. She was standing at the edge of the walking path, flanked by 2 of her property standards officers, retired men with clipboards and absolutely no business making decisions about anything sharper than a butter knife. Sharon had a tablet in hand, pointing at my property like she was scouting a battlefield. I raised a hand in the friendliest wave I could manage. She smiled, but not the good kind. This was the tight-lipped, I already filed paperwork kind of smile. Then she turned and walked off like she'd just reviewed an acquisition. An hour later, I got the email. Subject, pending review, unclaimed recreational land. Body, Dear Mr. Cole, as part of our 2024 Community Revitalization Initiative, the HOA is conducting a review of adjacent undeveloped properties that may qualify for reintegration into shared use areas. Your parcel has been flagged as potentially unregistered HOA space. Please refrain from making any alterations, repairs, or landscaping adjustments until further notice. Respectfully, Sharon Tiller, President Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. Unregistered HOA space. That's not a thing. You're either under their jurisdiction or you're not. And I was very, very not. But I knew what this was. A test, a little nudge to see if I'd push back. HOA 101, push the quiet ones first. If they don't bite, call it a mistake and backpedal. If they do nothing, boom. You've got a brand new square of territory to repaint beige and name after a tree that doesn't grow here. I didn't respond, not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd take it. 3 days later, a sign appeared at the end of my driveway. Future site, Willow Ridge Community Reflection Pond. It had a stylized graphic of reeds, a sunset, and what looked suspiciously like my dock, only repainted and surrounded by little benches that screamed HOA sanitized serenity. I pulled the sign out and laid it gently against Sharon's fence. Didn't break it, didn't stomp it, just leaned it there with the quiet confidence of a man who'd once filed a 90-page response to a federal brief and won on footnote 6. That same evening, I got a violation notice for improper disposal of community signage. Apparently, returning their trash was now a finable offense. The fine, $125. But the message? Crystal clear. Sharon was testing the waters. She wasn't trying to win yet. She was checking the map, marking coordinates, and seeing how much of my land she could slowly rope off without triggering alarms. And that was her first mistake. Because I am the alarm. I've fought bigger battles with smaller budgets. I've dismantled annexation cases with a single comma. And if she thought for 1 second that she could sneak her pastel little trail signs onto my grandfather's land without resistance, well, let's just say she picked the wrong lawyer to poke with a rake. It started raining fines like it was monsoon season in legalese. First came the $125 ticket for misplaced signage, which I politely returned, laminated and mounted in a gold frame, to Sharon's front porch. 2 days later, I received a community disturbance citation for unauthorized use of power tools during non-designated hours. The tool in question? A battery-powered leaf blower I used at 10:06 a.m. on a Tuesday. Then came the kicker. $850 for unauthorized water retention on HOA adjacent property. Water retention. They were fining me for having a pond. Next morning, I stepped outside to find an official HOA placard staked near my dock, warning of environmental hazard, standing water. May attract mosquitoes. It even had one of those bright red biohazard icons, as if my grandfather's hand-dug pond was 2 inches away from becoming a CDC site. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds holding a cup of coffee, trying to figure out which part of my soul had died enough to let this happen. And then, like a sick punchline, a neighbor jogged past, usually friendly, always smiling, and didn't make eye contact. Not a wave, not a nod, just kept running, headphones in, eyes on the ground. That's when I noticed more of them. Sideways glances at the mailbox, tighter smiles, people crossing the street instead of walking past my driveway. Sharon had started the Whisper campaign. The uncooperative landowner. The former lawyer with control issues. The guy who thinks he's above the rules. I even heard someone at the coffee shop mutter, "Isn't he trying to sue the HOA?" over a puddle. The community was turning, quietly, efficiently, like a flock that senses one of its own is no longer welcome. And then they crossed the line. I was working on the dock, sanding the bench my grandfather built, the one with the initials EJC carved into the underside. I'd just finished sealing the wood, letting it cure in the late afternoon sun, when I went inside for 15 minutes to take a call. 15 minutes. When I came back out, the bench was gone. Not broken, not vandalized. Gone. The screws were still there, lined up on the dock like someone had respectfully, surgically uninstalled a memory. I called around. Code enforcement said it wasn't them. County Parks had no work orders. The HOA's official response? We have no record of any furniture removals from non-registered parcels. Perhaps it was misplaced. Misplaced. As if an 80-pound hand-built cedar bench just grew legs and wandered off to find itself. I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I didn't even kick anything, which for me is growth. Instead, I walked back inside, opened the manila folder labeled Property Documentation, Federal Carve-Out, and placed it gently on the table. Then I made tea. See, I'd been waiting for them to cross that invisible line, the one between bureaucracy and theft, between HOA nonsense and something actionable, because that bench wasn't just sentimental, it was listed. I'd filed it 5 years ago under the Private Historical Items Registry Act, a dusty piece of state legislation no one ever talks about unless they happen to have a qualifying artifact. Turns out my grandfather's bench, built in 1962 from repurposed naval crate wood, documented in a handwritten letter and supported by dated photos, was one of only 3 remaining examples of its kind. It was protected, and now it was missing. So no, I didn't scream, I documented, I time-stamped. I saved footage from my security cameras and flagged 2 unfamiliar figures, one in a reflective HOA vest, hauling it onto a flatbed cart just before sunset. They looked very organized, very deliberate. Sharon didn't just want my land, she wanted to erase everything that made it mine. And now? Now she'd done something irreversible. Because when you steal from a man who still has legal access to a judge's cell number and the kind of memory that logs timestamps like a server farm, you don't just escalate the fight. You start the clock. The funny thing about doing things the right way is that it only feels good when someone else doesn't actively weaponize the system against you. But I'm a rule follower at heart. I know, tragic flaw for a man in a war with an HOA, so I started where you're supposed to start, documentation. On Monday, I printed and mailed a formal cease and desist to the HOA office, certified with return receipt, outlining the theft of the bench and referencing its listing on the State Registry of Protected Historical Items. I even attached a scan of the registry ID and timestamp security footage showing the bench being relocated by Sharon's lawn liaisons. On Tuesday, I received a reply from their legal liaison, and I swear, I wish I were making this up, stating that as the object in question was located on disputed property, the HOA acted in accordance with Community Beautification Authority. Community Beautification Authority. Is that what we're calling theft now? I emailed back. Clarified that there was no dispute, only their misreading of zoning maps that hadn't been updated since the Bush administration. Attached 3 county plats, a notarized affidavit from the surveyor, and a copy of my grandfather's land deed that explicitly exempted the property from all future subdivision agreements. Their response, a PDF of a page from the HOA handbook. Not a legal document, not a signed addendum, just a page from a handbook with the heading, Vision 2025, Expanding Our Green Footprint. It included such gems as community alignment, enhanced natural resource stewardship, and my personal favorite, non-conforming structures may be removed at the discretion of the board to maintain cohesion. Cohesion, like this was a condo brochure and not someone's legacy. So I did what every tired, overly qualified American homeowner does when bureaucracy gets cute. I scheduled a meeting. HOA open sessions happen the first Thursday of every month in a rented rec center that smells like plastic chairs and hurt feelings. I showed up early, wore a clean shirt, brought a stack of documents so thick it required a separate binder clip for supporting appendices. Sharon sat at the center of the table, flanked by 3 board members who looked like they'd rather be undergoing minor surgery. She smiled as I walked in. Not warm, more performative, like a politician kissing a baby she low-key finds sticky. "Mr. Cole," she said, eyes scanning my folder like it might explode, "to what do we owe the honor?" "I'm here to settle this," I said, calmly placing the binder on the table, peacefully, with facts and a little bit of common sense if there's any left in the building. She didn't flinch, just gave me that corporate head tilt that says, "I'm pretending to listen while planning your funeral." I walked them through everything: the exemption, the registry, the illegal removal, the video footage. I even handed out printed color photos of the bench, complete with date stamps and annotations. Honestly, I was proud. It was like my inner paralegal threw a parade. Then Sharon leaned forward and said, "We appreciate your passion, Elijah. But the community has moved in a different direction. We're trying to create unity, consistency. The pond area? It just doesn't fit that." I blinked. "You stole a bench." She clasped her hands. "We preserved a structure that was a safety liability. The screws were rusted. There were splinters." "You just described wood, Sharon." There were chuckles in the back row, small, muffled, quickly silenced. She pushed on. "We also believe the presence of private fixtures on what is perceived as common space sends the wrong message to new residents." Perceived. I'd like that word chiseled on her career headstone. Here lies Sharon's credibility, buried beneath a mountain of perception. I took a slow breath. I tried, I really did. I brought paperwork, I brought evidence, I gestured to the binder, an entire section titled, "What You're Doing Is Not Just Wrong, It's Arguably Criminal." Sharon leaned back, confident. "Then you're welcome to pursue this through the proper channels." And there it was, the HOA equivalent of "go ahead and sue me." They wanted me to back off, to get tired, to grumble and fold like everyone else probably had. But I didn't fold. I just closed the binder, calmly, like a man zipping up a body bag. "Well," I said, smiling, "if you insist on the proper channels, I guess it's time I introduce you to some of mine." And I walked out, past the board, past the residents, past the smell of cheap carpet and passive aggression, already forming the first draft of what would soon become the most uncomfortable public audit Sharon had ever experienced. Because here's the thing, you only get to steal a man's bench once. After that, you're just building your case for a reckoning. When the system fails you, you don't yell, you research. And when the research doesn't work, you dig. So that's exactly what I did. I stopped trying to reason with people who thought bylaws overrode property law and decided it was time to go deeper. Not into case law or municipal code, I'd already done that dance, but into history, my family's history. I started in the basement. Now this wasn't a typical finished basement with recessed lighting and polished floors. No, this was an honest-to-God root cellar turned archive bunker, the kind of place that smelled like dust, ink, and male stubbornness. My grandfather had kept everything: land purchase receipts, war discharge papers, letters from senators, even carbon copies of certified mail he sent in the 70s, just in case the feds tried to pull a fast one. I dug through file boxes for hours. Somewhere between a disintegrating manila folder labeled Tax Assessor Idiots, 1982, and an envelope marked Do Not Burn, I found it. A rolled-up blueprint, yellowed at the edges, fragile like old newspaper. It was a map. A surveyor's hand-drawn boundary sketch from 1956, marked in black ink with annotations that would give any zoning board a legal nosebleed. And in the lower right corner, something I didn't expect, a red wax seal from the U.S. Department of the Interior. That's when my heart did the legal version of a double take. I flipped it over and found a second page. A formal declaration, signed, notarized, and dated, confirming that the property had been part of a federal veterans homestead preservation program, one that excluded the land from municipal annexation and explicitly barred future entities, including homeowners associations, from exerting authority over it. Not temporarily, in perpetuity. I sat there on the floor, paper trembling in my hands, stunned, silent for the first time in weeks. Sharon hadn't just overstepped, she had tried to seize federally protected land, and it got worse. Taped to the back of the document, as if my grandfather had planned for this day, was a note in his handwriting: "If anyone from the HOA ever tries to touch this land, show them this and tell them to go pound sand. If that doesn't work, call Ruth in Records. She still owes me for the camping stove." Ruth in Records. That was my grandfather's version of Google. The next morning, I made a few calls, asked a few polite questions, and within 48 hours, I had a scanned PDF in my inbox that almost made me laugh out loud. See, not only had the land been exempt from HOA control, it had also been part of a test case in 1972 used in a federal lawsuit against a land developer trying to roll over veteran exemptions. That case? Cole versus Southern Meadows. Development Incorporated. My grandfather had sued a major real estate firm and won. His case helped set a precedent still cited in land disputes across the South. A precedent that, legally speaking, made my parcel untouchable without express consent from the Department of the Interior and a federal override, which, spoiler alert, the Willow Ridge HOA didn't have. And yet, Sharon had filed multiple reports listing my land as community amenable transitional acreage. That was her mistake, because someone had to invent that phrase, and once I started looking, I found her name on everything. She wasn't just overreaching, she was orchestrating a quiet grab of outlier lots to repackage the development into a uniform community zone. Why? Simple. Profit. By consolidating the map and absorbing all non-conforming parcels, she could qualify Willow Ridge for a lucrative Enhanced Development certification. That meant increased resale values, green tax credits, and, here's the kicker, the chance to broker a deal with a local developer she'd previously worked with as a real estate consultant. In short, Sharon wasn't preserving the community, she was flipping it, from the inside. And the only thing standing in her way? A stubborn patch of land with a pond, a bench, and a legal history thicker than her entire HOA charter. Mine. So now, I wasn't just fighting for my grandfather's land. I was sitting on the legal equivalent of a bombshell. And Sharon? She had just walked into court wearing a gasoline-soaked suit. I wasn't angry, not really. Not in the flip-a-table, scream-into-a-pillow sense. No, this was different. This was cold. Strategic. See, there's a special kind of quiet rage that settles in once you realize the person trying to ruin your life isn't just arrogant, they're sloppy. And Sharon? She was arrogant and sloppy, a bureaucratic bull in a china shop full of legal landmines. And now I had the detonator, but I wasn't going to yell or march or throw some messy neighborhood protest with flyers and folding chairs. I was going to litigate her out of existence. Step 1. Build the case. Thoroughly, invisibly, perfectly. I pulled every shred of documentation I had. Maps, deeds, federal designations, scanned copies of the 1972 precedent from Cole v. Southern Meadows, and most importantly, the email Sharon herself sent to the board listing my property as transitional green zone eligible, a phrase that had no legal meaning but plenty of intent. Then I started digging deeper. I filed a FOIA request for communications between Sharon's HOA and the developers she'd previously worked with, a real estate group that just so happened to be petitioning for a community revitalization pilot in 3 neighborhoods, including ours. I looped in a friend of mine, Sam, a former land use attorney turned professor with a taste for bureaucratic blood. She took one look at the documentation, leaned back in her chair, and said, "Oh, she's screwed. She just doesn't know it yet." Which brings me to step 2, let them walk right into it. See, Sharon thought she was winning. The fake violations, the social pressure, the theft of the bench. She believed I was just another non-compliant speed bump on her little real estate racetrack. Because I wasn't fighting her there. I was fighting her elsewhere. Behind the scenes, Sam and I drafted a formal legal notice, cease and desist, demand for return of property, and notification of pending suit under Title 36 U.S. Code, Section 1220. Yes, that's real. Yes, she violated it. I had it couriered, not mailed, not emailed. Couriered to the HOA board and Sharon's personal residence, signed and time-stamped. Then came the media kit. Oh yeah, I built a media kit. Not because I wanted the attention, but because people like Sharon hate attention, at least the kind they can't control. I compiled a digital folder with a short press brief, legal documents, a highlight reel of the property boundary violations, and photos of the historic bench. I sent it to a local reporter I'd worked with back in my DC days, a guy who now ran a blog called Suburban Watchdog. He specialized in homeowner horror stories and had a particular grudge against HOAs after one made him remove his grandmother's wind chimes. He read the first 2 pages and called me. "Tell me she really filed that transitional acreage thing," he said. "Yep." "And you've got federal land protections in writing?" "I've got a wax seal." He actually whistled. "I'll have something up by Monday." Step 3. Expose the breach. I compiled everything into a formal ethics complaint, naming Sharon as the acting party in an unlawful annexation attempt, misappropriation of HOA funds, and unauthorized property seizure. Sam helped me file it with the State Oversight Board for Homeowners Associations and, just for good measure, sent a CC to the County Commissioner, the Department of the Interior, and the Real Estate Licensing Bureau. Sharon didn't know it yet, but she had just wandered into a courtroom she couldn't gavel her way out of. All that was left now was timing. Because if you're going to dethrone a suburban tyrant, you don't just march in swinging, you let them schedule their own downfall. And lucky for me, the annual HOA community meeting with a mandatory board review, a budget vote, and open mic Q&A was coming up in exactly 10 days. I circled the date, and I smiled. The community center smelled like expired coffee and old printer toner, the kind of place where scandals go to stretch their legs. It was the night of the annual HOA meeting. The turnout was bigger than usual. Normally, you'd get the same 10 retirees and one guy who always brought his emotional support, Schnauzer. But this time, people were standing in the back. Some had clipboards. A couple had iPhones aimed discreetly at the front. Sharon had drawn a crowd, and she knew it. She walked in wearing her usual power red blazer, like she was about to host a TED Talk titled How to Bully Legally in Suburbia. Clipboard in hand, chin high, smile tight. She scanned the room like a queen, arriving at her own execution and still thinking she might win. I was sitting near the back, no binder this time, just a slim folder and a flash drive in my coat pocket. The meeting began with the usual mind-numbing routine: minutes read, budget line items reviewed, someone asking why the mailbox paint budget exceeded the park upkeep by 300%. Sharon dismissed it with a maintenance continuity excuse. And then it came. Item number 9, Community Beautification and Transitional Land Use Update. Sharon stepped to the mic. Over the past year, she began, voice sweet and polished, we've made enormous progress toward creating a more unified, accessible community space. Our Greenbelt expansion plan, as outlined in the 2025 vision packet, includes parcels previously underutilized or inconsistently maintained. I'm pleased to announce we're in the final stages of integrating all relevant zones into a unified map. There was polite clapping. Then she glanced at me. And we appreciate the community's patience as we navigate the complexity of incorporating formerly unaligned lots. Formerly unaligned. That was her euphemism for my land. I stood up before she could finish. Point of order, I said, calm as could be. She blinked. We're not in open session yet, Mr. Cole. I'm aware, but given that I'm the only resident whose federally exempt land you're attempting to annex with fake survey language and illegal removals of registered historic property, I figured I'd save us all the suspense. That got the room's attention. Sharon laughed. Let's not dramatize. I walked up to the front and pulled a small laptop from my bag, handed it to the volunteer IT guy who looked like he'd been waiting for this moment since dial-up. He plugged in the flash drive. The projector flickered to life. First slide, exempt status of parcel number 447A, Cole Property, Federal Registry. Official seal, government logo, date 1956. Second slide, handwritten note from Sharon to the board, obtained through my FOIA request, where she refers to my pond as low-hanging annexation fruit and says she'll handle the paperwork on the back end. Third slide, a copy of the original Cole Vias. Southern Meadows decision, highlighted, underlined, with language about veterans' property rights, federal carve-outs, and specific restrictions on private encroachment. The murmuring started in the second row. By the time I got to the next slide, an HOA invoice showing $2,300 spent on green zone preparation paid to a landscaping company owned by Sharon's sister-in-law. People weren't murmuring anymore. I let it sit there. Then I said, I filed an ethics complaint, which includes evidence of financial misconduct, unlawful property encroachment, and potential wire fraud based on misrepresented zoning data used in emails to developers. I've also filed for an injunction. You'll all be getting a copy. Sharon didn't speak. She couldn't. Because then the IT guy hit play on a short clip I'd dropped at the end of the presentation, a Ring camera video of her beautification officers removing my grandfather's bench. One of them laughed, saying, she said this guy's just some burned-out lawyer. No one's gonna miss it. Dead silence. Until someone in the back said, wait, that was his bench? From the war era? And then another voice, that pond's been there longer than the HOA. And another, did she say low-hanging fruit? Is my property next? The room turned. Sharon tried to speak, raised her hand, smiled that icy press conference smiles, but this wasn't her microphone anymore. Greg, one of the board members who always looked like a deer in high beams, suddenly found his spine. I move that we immediately suspend Sharon Tiller from her role pending a formal audit. Seconded. Voted. Passed. Just like that. She looked at me like she couldn't quite believe it, like reality had been rewired without her consent, like she'd shown up to a Monopoly game and suddenly everyone was speaking antitrust law. I leaned in slightly, just loud enough for her to hear. I told you, I said. You only get to steal a man's bench once. The next morning, the story broke. Not in a whisper, not in a polite press release tucked between dog adoption listings and a bake sale notice. Number. It exploded. Right there, on the homepage of Suburban Watchdog, in bold font above the fold, HOA president tries to seize federally protected land for profit, caught red-handed by local resident. There was a photo of me standing on my dock in a flannel shirt and coffee-stained jeans, pointing at the pond like I was giving a TED Talk titled "Don't Touch My Damn Water." Beneath that, screenshots of Sharon's emails, links to the court filings, side-by-side property maps, and a juicy little section titled "The Bench Heard Round the Neighborhood." By noon, it had over 12,000 shares. By 4 p.m., the local CBS affiliate had picked it up. Then NBC. Then a podcast called HOA Horror Stories messaged me asking for an interview. I declined. I wasn't looking to become the poster child of petty suburban warfare. But I did let them use the phrase transitional acreage as their new running joke. Meanwhile, the fallout in Willow Ridge was biblical. First, the HOA board released a panic statement full of phrases like internal investigation, acting without board consensus, and the ever-popular "we take these allegations seriously." Then someone, not me but bless their anonymous heart, sent out a flyer titled "What Else Is Sharon Hiding?" It had a timeline of shady transactions, quotes from previous board members who'd mysteriously resigned, and a breakdown of how Sharon's sister-in-law's landscaping company had been overcharging for decorative mulch assessments. Turns out my case was just the tipping point. People started digging, and they found things. Within 48 hours, the county issued a formal request for Sharon's HOA financials. By the end of the week, the real estate developer she'd been cozying up to released a statement. We were unaware of any legal irregularities and are pausing all future projects in the area pending review. Translation, we're not going down with her. And then, the cherry on top, Sharon's real estate license status went from active to under investigation. You could practically hear the hinges coming off her career. Neighbors who had ignored me for weeks suddenly found reasons to say hi. One guy dropped off a bottle of bourbon with a post-it note that read, "For the pond lawyer. Keep fighting the good fight." A middle-aged woman who'd once complained about my untrimmed hedges came by to ask if I'd speak at the next board election meeting. I politely declined. My ambition stopped somewhere before neighborhood politics. As for Sharon, last I heard, she voluntarily stepped down to focus on personal matters. Word on the street is she's trying to sell her house, but no one wants to buy until the HOA audit finishes. Funny how market value plummets when you're the face of suburban scandal. And the bench returned. No note, no apology. But one morning, there it was, sitting right on my dock, reassembled, cleaned, and sealed like it had never been touched. I checked the screws, still a little crooked, just like my grandfather left them. Perfect. Spring came early this year. The kind of spring that doesn't ask permission. It just rolls in one morning and tells the frost to pack its bags. The willow bloomed fast, full and defiant, its branches trailing into the water like it knew it had survived something. I was sitting on the bench again, the bench, cup of coffee in one hand, book in the other, boots up on the dock's edge like I owned the place. Which of course I did, legally, federally, historically, and now publicly. The bench looked good, better than good. I'd tightened the screws, resealed the wood, and restored the little brass plaque that had fallen off sometime in the 90s. It read, Arthur J. Cole, 1925 to 2004. Don't let idiots win. Grandpa was never one for flowery words. Across the pond, kids from the neighborhood were tossing pebbles. A couple of dads set up a folding chair nearby and gave me a quick nod. The universal male code for "we cool now?" I nodded back. Peace through minimal eye contact. The HOA hadn't disappeared, of course. They don't just vanish, they regroup like middle management hydras. But the board had changed. Greg was acting president now. He sent me a card last week with a handwritten note that said, "You were right. Also, thanks for not suing us into oblivion." It came with a gift card to Home Depot. $50. Nice touch. Sharon? Well, let's just say the "for sale" sign on her lawn finally came down, replaced with a new one that read, "Contract pending." Rumor has it she moved 2 counties over, somewhere with no HOA. I hear the irony's lovely this time of year. Every once in a while, I'll see someone slow walking by the property line taking pictures of the pond. Maybe they're curious, maybe they're thinking of filing another claim, maybe they're just admiring it. Doesn't matter. The boundary signs are clear, the title is solid, and the legal precedent? Let's just say it's watertight. I've gone back to writing part-time, legal articles mostly. Occasionally, I slip this whole saga into a lecture at the law school. Not by name, of course, I just refer to it as the case of the overambitious HOA. The students always laugh at the part where the bench disappears. They stop laughing when I show them the footage. But mostly, I keep things quiet now. Mornings on the dock, coffee just the way Grandpa made it, strong enough to strip paint, the wind through the willow, that familiar creak in the bench when I lean back just right. It's not flashy, it's not landscaped, but it's home. And for the record, still not part of the HOA. God bless America.